All right, welcome back. All right, settle down. Yeah, welcome back. So let's see, it's web dev, right? In the right place. They got me running back and forth. So yeah, so last week we introduced the course. We went over some of the assignments and a little bit of the schedule and what are the various topics we're going to be covering. And so let's go over that real quick just to see where we are and where we're going. So last week was kind of like a half week introducing the course. Went over a little bit of the agenda, and we had just started. We had just created a boilerplate out of the box React application using NPX, and we were just going through it, looking at the content and how it was generating some of the dynamic content. We'll go over that today real quick. And so this week we'll cover HTML, get you started on the first assignment. We discussed the content of multiple labs, and the intent is for you to practice some of the skills. Today, I'd like to get you going on the second half of that assignment, which is the Canvas application, and get you going with that. It does ask you to create quite a few things, but I'd like to demonstrate that it's not as daunting as it might look. And also, you're welcome to reuse any content that I provide you with in the GitHub repository. And if you see it, if you find it's useful, then go ahead and just copy and paste it into yours if you find that it's useful to you. The content today is going to look pretty non-professional just yet, right? We're going to just focus on how to lay out content, get to know some of the how to create forms, drop downs, input fields, date pickers, and things like that, right? And how to lay out things horizontally, vertically, in lists and tables, things like that. Some of the boilerplate stuff that we need to get out of the way. So next, the next assignment, we'll revisit the same content that we are creating for this first assignment, and it'll with the effort of making it look much more presentable, much more professional, a little more polished, and closer to what the intended look and feel is, right? We'll look at changing background colors, foreground colors, lay it out using Flex and grid systems and whatnot, using CSS, and we'll look at one of the more popular CSS libraries. Up to this point, the first two assignments is mostly just working with static content, right? It doesn't react to user input other than maybe just navigating from one screen to the next. But you can't change any content, you can't add content, delete content, any of that. So that for that, we're going to be in the third assignment, we're going to revisit our implementation and add JavaScript and React so that we can then handle user input and so that you can change the data structures and make it more data driven and more dynamic. All right. So that's the plan for the next couple of weeks. The third week, I guess week 2, we will have our first quiz, which will be just going over in the second half of the third week. So on Thursday, we'll have our first quiz, which will go over HTML, basically just asking about your first assignment, creating forms, handling hyperlinks, some acronyms. I love acronyms, so make sure you know your acronyms. Yes, that's next Thursday. Yeah, the second half of week 2. Today's week 1. Yeah, so that's the plan for the next several weeks. Okay, any questions? All right, so we had just started with the talking about the first assignment, and the intent was for you to become familiar with the HTML programming language. It's not programming; it's a formatting language that allows us to create the HTML documents, right? And HTML is just a very simple language that allows you to lay out the content, a rough content in HTML format. So let's take a look at what what that means, right? So for instance, anytime you navigate to a website like this one, everything you see was rendered using the HTML language, right? And you can take a look at that language by inspecting the page, right? Most browsers will have some option to inspect the content. You can look at the raw text that was downloaded from the server. This is the raw text that came from the server, right? And the browser parses through this huge HTML content, plus JavaScript, plus CSS, plus images, right? And after it parses it, it renders it like this, right? This is what you see, right? So that's behind the scenes. This is what you actually see. Now, once it parses it, it makes a memory version of that parsing, right? It creates several data structures in memory in the browser. And you can look at that by not look at the page. This is the raw text that's coming from the server. If you inspect it instead, right? It's interpretation. It's a browser creating a data structure in its memory, right? Of having parsed that raw text file. Yes, right. And so what you see here is it's a representation. It's a digital representation of that static ASCII file, right? It's not a one-to-one because that HTML document could have syntax errors. We might have misspelled something. We might have put something in the wrong order, right? And the browser will make its best guess, right? It'll be fairly lenient on whatever mistype or what you might have, any syntax error you might have created. And this is the best guess that it comes up with, right? Of having parsed that data structure. And this data structure is, it's fairly similar to what that ASCII file is. But if you'll notice, this is it's a data structure, right? You can look at the hierarchical nature of this, where there's a root and there's a whole bunch of branches and nodes, right? And you can navigate this data structure and to see that there are children. There's several nodes that have several children. You can navigate all that down to its leaves. Okay. Now so this data structure is called the DOM, right? The Document Object Model, right? It's a computer's representation of what it has parsed from the HTML document. Make sense? Right. Now we're going to try not to create those syntax errors, right? But nevertheless, right, the browser are very, very lenient. Not phone browsers, because they're smaller in size and maybe a little less powerful. Those are a little more less lenient, right? And more strict, right? On because they have a smaller footprint, they have a smaller CPUs and whatnot, so they're a little more strict on what they want to parse, right? So yeah. So let's take a look at this content real quick. Now this is the entire document. This is the root. Notice that if I highlight the HTML here, it highlights the entire left-hand side, right? Saying that this node that I'm selecting on the right-hand side is rendering all the highlighted side of the left-hand side, which is the whole thing, right? Because I'm at the root of the document. If I highlight the head, notice that it doesn't highlight anything, right? And basically it's because the head node doesn't really render anything. It just has some meta information about who the author is, when was this published, any dependencies with other documents, right? JavaScript stuff and CSS documents. It has dependencies, right? But not actually render. Maybe just the title. That's all it renders. The tab in the browser, but not much than that. Then you have the body. Notice again, if I highlight the body, it says the whole body is rendered here on the left-hand side. Now you can specify a specific portion of the UI here. Like if I inspect this particular portion, right? It on the right-hand side, it highlights the exact node responsible for rendering that particular rectangle. Okay, and you can go even further down. You can navigate even further down and says, okay, well, there's a hyperlink there, and that's the as far down as it goes. Actually, no, it can go a little further. There's an image in there, scalable vector graphic, a little graphic here. And this is the polygon that renders that little keyboard or that little like share hyperlink, right? So that's an image that's being drawn and by pixel lines and whatnot, right? So yeah, these are the leaves of this huge tree, right? Where the root is the HTML node, right? And then you have all these branches all the way down to the leaves, and the leaves are the ones who actually draw anything on the screen. Yes, okay. So if I go higher in the tree, notice that it gets what you see on the left-hand side gets broader and broader because the content gets bigger and bigger, right? So if I go further up, right, notice that it highlights a bigger rectangle. If I go even higher, it gets just bigger and bigger, right? Up until I get to this LI. Notice this LI. That's one particular type of node that we're going to use quite a bit. It means line item. Line item inside of a unordered list UL. Okay. And notice that it highlights this whole left-hand side, saying that what you see here, there's being rendered by an unordered list, right? That contains a whole bunch of line items, right? And these are all the line items. If I hover on each one, I could see which line item is responsible for rendering what on the left-hand side. Make sense? Also notice that if I click on this line item and I do a delete, it disappears from the left-hand side, right? So whatever I do to this DOM, to this document object model, it's immediately rendered on the left-hand side, right? And I can keep removing other stuff, right? Now it doesn't mean that I'm actually removing content on the database, right? The database still has those line items, it still has all that content, right? If I refresh the screen, right, it goes out to the server again, it reparses the HTML and recreates the DOM on the right-hand side, right? And then it renders on the left-hand side. Make sense? Okay. So much of this course is about, right, how do we best manipulate this data structure on the right-hand side, right? How do we programmatically manipulate this data structure? Okay. The simplest is to just statically create an HTML document, right? Where you create all these ULs and these LIs and yada, yada, right? And the browser parses your HTML document, right? And it renders, it creates the DOM from your HTML document and it renders the screen. Yes? That's what the first assignment is. That's what the first assignment is. In later assignments, assignment 3, we're going to learn how to do this, not manually, right? Not coding every single line of HTML. Instead, we're going to learn about using JavaScript, right, to maybe create an array, which you loop over that array, right, and it dynamically creates all the line items based on some data structure. Make sense, right? We're going to learn how to programmatically render this and draw this data structure, which then the browser will render the left-hand side. Make sense, right? Now, other things here is that these line items, by default, they don't look as nice as this, right? By default, they look like bullet line items, just bullets, some ugly underlined piece of text and whatnot, right? The thing that makes it look prettier, or with the white spaces above and below, the nice green highlight on the left-hand side, the nice check box on the right-hand side, is a different language, which is listed down below. Right, down below is a different language called CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, right? Which what they do is that they say they reference different parts of the DOM above and says, hey, that LI under an element whose class is IGList under another element whose class is item group container, I want the margin to be 0, right? I want the background color to be white, right? I want no borders, the width to be 100% to take up the entire width of the screen. So this here, this other language, this additional language, basically goes out to the DOM and says, okay, it navigates the DOM, right, using these rules, and whatever matches the rule on the left-hand side, it applies the transformation on the right-hand side, right? It says, if you have a line item, notice this line item, it says that it has it's an LI item that is under an element whose class is IGList. Let's see if that's true. That's UL. There it is, right? It has a class of IGList. And that line item is also under that IG list is under an element whose class is item group. Let's see if that's true. Somewhere there's an item group above, item group somewhere in here. So it adds the margin 0, right? So that will be the focus of the second assignment, right? The second assignment is we're going to learn, right, how to write this CSS at the bottom so that we can then style our content to be a little prettier, a little more professional, a little more polished. Yes? And that's the second assignment. The third assignment comes back and makes this all dynamic, right? Today we'll notice that it's going to be a lot of copy paste today, right? Which when we get to the JavaScript assignment, we're going to say, well, you know, all that copy paste we did back then. Well, we could programmatically do this, right? We can create loops. Whenever a software engineer finds themselves copying and pasting, that should be a red flag saying, wait a minute, can I automate this somehow? Is there a data structure and some loop that I can do this? Absolutely, right? And we'll do that when we get to JavaScript and React.js and whatnot, right? Today, we'll do a lot of copy and pasting. All right. All right. So everybody still okay, right? That's where we're going. So yeah, we're going to focus today on building a few of these things. Obviously, it's not going to look as pretty. We'll come back next week and we'll make it a little bit more presentable. But we'll create this left-hand side as a list of hyperlinks, right? That is going to allow us to navigate to a dashboard. It's going to allow us to navigate to our account, right? Our profile screen. Okay, we'll and also be able to go to our particular course, right? So we'll create this navigation as a list of links. We'll create this second sidebar also of links as well. We'll create this right-hand side as a list of things, right? And we're gonna create these in separate HTML documents that are gonna allow us to, work on each individual piece, right? We'll then copy these pieces into one big screen that's gonna contain 4 columns with all its pieces in there, copied and pasted from each individual HTML documents. The intent is that when we get to the third assignment, all these HTML pieces of snippets, right, will already exist in their independent HTML files, and we will be hopefully we'll be able to quickly, easily convert them into JavaScript files, right? That can be inside functions that can be programmatically imported and reused as little modules, right? That's where we're going. That's where we're going eventually. So today we're just going to create the little snippets, copy and paste them manually. And later we'll learn how to do this programmatically. All right. All right. Yeah. So let's take a look at the first part of this. We're being asked to build in Canvas to build the home screen. Okay. I'm going to skip over the labs. The labs. The intention is for you to practice. How to make a list, how to make a table, how to make a form, how to make individual exercises, right? Which they all come together for you to actually build something, which is the Canvas application. I'm going to directly go to the Canvas application, and as I go and implement these things, I will reference the labs, right, and the different skills that each lab tackles, right? And so we'll be able to see how to use all these individual skills into building something, putting it together. All right. Okay. So the home screen. All right. So we had created already a React application, and we had visited, we had discussed that out of the box, the React application uses JavaScript to inject content right into our index.html. That's a little bit of magic that we don't know about just yet, right? So what I did is I just broke it. I just commented out and said, let's not deal with this just yet. We'll come back to this in our third assignment, and we'll revive this again. Meanwhile, we're just going to focus our attention in the public directory, right? And we had said that whatever you put in the public directory is made available to anyone, right? Anything you drop in here is made available. So if you put in a hello document, right? If you start this, npm start, the server comes up, and if I ask for the hello.txt, it doesn't work. What? Did I put it in the right place? Oh, I didn't put anything in there. Yeah. I hate computers. They do exactly what they're told. So yeah, so there it is. So notice that it went out to the server. The server's running. It's listening for incoming requests at port 3000. Localhost is my local machine, and that file is inside of my public directory. Right, anything I put in there is publicly available. Well, obviously, right now it's just on my machine, right? But if I put this, hosting it on Netlify or any public server, it would be publicly available to anyone who might know my IP address, right, or my machine name. And so notice that anything I put under public, even including any directory, tests, and I put my hello under there, right? I can, if I refresh, it's no longer there, right? But it's under test now. Did I call it test? Oh no, I put it under test. Sorry. So I refresh. There it is, right? So basically, this directory structure that I have here maps to the physical file system, right, on my machine under that public directory. Yes, right. So we call this first slash. We call that the root context, right, which maps to this physically, right, to this to whatever physical directory that is, right, which is NEU 2023 blah 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 all the way down to this public directory. Everybody good? And then I can navigate in that file system. Okay. Now, if I don't ask for anything, by default, the server is programmed or configured to return a file called index.html under that folder, right? If the folder contains an index.html, that's the file you're going to get if you don't ask for anything in particular. Yes? All right. And indeed, that's what happens. Notice that I'm not asking for any file, and that's what I'm getting. I'm getting index.html. Now, obviously, I can ask for it specifically, right? And there it is, right? Now, some servers are configured for security purposes, not to give out the index.html, right? To only if you specifically ask for it, right? So that you don't inadvertently provide content without being very explicit of what you're asking for, right? So anyway, so we had created inside of our index.html, we had commented out our little root div, right? This is where the magic of React is going to happen in a couple of weeks, not yet. Meanwhile, we had introduced our first heading elements, right? Or sometimes referred to as, we call this either an element or an HTML tag, or also a node. Remember, if I inspect, right? If I inspect, I can see that I created this H1, right? And there it is, H1. And it's rendering as this inverted tree, right, with the root of the HTML. And so this is the easiest way of right now of creating this DOM, right, document object model, right? It parses it and then it renders on the left-hand side. And we have the hyperlink. There it is, our hyperlink that points to lab 1. That if I click on it, right, it navigates to that document, right? Labs A1, which is under there. It's under A1. There it is, right? Which if I go to lab 1, right, this should go into this index file that says this is a smaller heading, right? This is a smaller heading, and you can see that the HTML has been replaced with my lab 1 A1 HTML document. See that? Now notice that my browser has been very nice at adding stuff that I omitted. Right? Notice that nowhere had I added the HTML and the head and the body. See that? So my HTML here has a syntactical error. I'm missing required HTML content. Yes? But my browser is lenient. It says, well, this content must be in the body. So that's where I'm going to put it. Okay? And that's what I meant by this being a representation, right, of a file. It's how the browser is interpreting your HTML. Yes? And is being very lenient. Now, Certainly, I could go in and fix this up and put HTML and body and heading and whatnot, yes, to make it a proper HTML document. But I'm not going to, right? Because I know where we're going, right? We're going towards React, and in React, everything is a snippet. Just a small snippet of HTML, which together it's built up into a bigger HTML document, right? It grabs all these a small snippet of code, right? And then it builds this dynamic content, right? And we're going to do that manually, copying and pasting, right? But when we get to React, all that will happen programmatically. Okay. So because I'm going that way, I'm going to break my own rule, and I'm not going to create a proper HTML. Okay. Especially because in Canvas is going to have lots of little pieces which we're going to copy and paste into, and I don't want all the pieces, every single one of them being HTML, body, heading, blah, blah, because I'm going to copy them into bigger documents. Yes, right. Okay, so let's focus on Canvas. First of all, I'm going to use capitalization only because later on we're going to reuse this code, right, in React components, right, which are already going to follow a naming convention. So I'm going to follow this naming convention here. So in Canvas, I'm going to first create an index file in here. And this would be my Canvas application, H1, which I should be able to navigate from here. I should be, Canvas. There it is. So that's my Canvas. Notice that I did not ask for index.html, but that automatically is serving up my index file. Everybody good? Okay. Also, there's a I'm going to follow inside of a Canvas a structure, a file structure that's going to try to replicate a little bit the structure of what I'm going to build. Okay. So, for instance, my Canvas application is going to have multiple sections, right? It's going to have a screen for the dashboard, another screen for the courses, another screen for the accounts, another screen for the calendar, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to follow that structure. I'm going to create under here, right, several folders dedicated to each subsection in there, right? So for instance, account, I'm going to have a dashboard, courses, and I'm going to have also the implementation of this navigation sidebar, right? And I'm going to put that under Canvas navigation, right? And in there, I'm going to create my links, my actual content, right? So that is going to be my navigation. It's going to be a list of, it's an unordered list of hyperlinks, right? That are going to allow me to navigate to multiple places in my document. Yes. You could follow along. You could also apply the same strategy, but you don't have to, right? A lot of this, you can copy the content into whatever you already have, right? I think it's a little bit simpler the way I explained it in the assignment to follow. I'm pushing it a little bit because we're going to reuse this later on in the course. So you don't have to, the content you can reuse, right? The structure you don't have to follow along, right? Since later on in the React portion, we're going to have to break it out into multiple components. This is already going to be broken out, right? For me. But the content you can reuse, right, to replace whatever you might have implemented. You'll see that I might end up exactly where you are in a few minutes. It's just that it's easier for me to copy and paste all these to deal with smaller pieces instead of one huge file. Okay. So this might be a couple of line items that allow me to navigate. But yeah, excellent. Thank you. That should allow me to navigate to an account, to courses, to dashboard, and whatnot, right? So there's a hyperlink that allows me to go to, say, courses index, right? And these would be courses. You might have here an account, and you might have another one that deals with dashboard, dashboard, okay? And I should be able to navigate and look at it independently, see if it looks good, right? So this is Canvas navigation. There it is, right? So there's account, dashboard, and courses. So obviously the end result should be many more links. If you don't know where to link to, like calendar, you don't know where to go, where it should be going, you can just use hash for now, like that. Right? If you don't really know where you're going just yet, right? And it might be a little bit too early to put hyperlinks in here, right? Because again, we're not quite done with all those targets of where we're going to be navigating. So we might need to come back and edit this, right? Where things actually end up going. Yes, right? But this allows us to work on individual snippets, right, independently, outside of this being used in a huge table instead of a huge an entire screen. Yes, right. And once I'm happy with it, right, then I can go in and maybe copy and paste it wherever I want to put it. Yes, right. Then in the courses, there's also going to be another sidebar. In the courses, there's another this sidebar here, right? And I'm going to call that the course, course navigation, right? So let's put that inside of courses. I'm going to put another folder here. I'll call it course navigation. Right. I'm just going to copy my index here in there because I already have a whole bunch of hyperlinks. Right, so this is the courses navigation, and courses navigation is going to have what home, modules, Piazza, Zoom, assignments. So let's add all those. Right. So there's home, modules, Piazza. What else we have? Zoom. What else we have? We've got quizzes, grades. So let me just add just grades. So grades, right? And let's fix this up. This would be inside of courses. Inside of courses, so inside of courses, if I go to courses, there'll be subsections inside of courses, right? This allows me to navigate to modules, allows me to navigate to Piazza, right? So there's a whole bunch of screens under courses, right? So I could maybe create separate directories for each one. So maybe I can say, this is the home directory. This is the assignments directory. The what else? Grades. Okay. Each one perhaps with its own index file, right? So let's so this might be index file, and this might say assignments, and each one might have, this would be maybe grades, right? And the navigation should allow me to navigate to each one of those, right? So it would be Canvas, courses, home, right? This would be modules, Piazza, grades. Do I have one for grades? I don't know. Great, yeah. So I should be able to navigate to my course navigation, and that should allow me to navigate to all the other portions, right? Let's see, we can navigate to the to courses, right? And then here, course navigation, right? And from here, I should be able to go home, maybe not. Did I put something in home? Canvas, courses, home, index, Canvas, courses. Oh, did I not create home? Oh, I did. Oh, I didn't put a file in there. So home. There we go. So I should be able to go grades. Huh? Did I not put? Oh, it's under courses. I broke it. The hyperlinks are broken. Wait a minute. Oh yeah. So it's under courses, right? Courses, like that. So this allows me to debug, right, my list of hyperlinks without it being part of one huge other document, right? Instead of a huge table or something that deals with the layout, right? It allows me to independently debug this until I'm happy with it, it's behaving as I want, and then I can just copy this and put it in where I'm going to use it. This is also the one of the great aspects of later when we use this, convert this into a JavaScript component, right? One of the great things about having these snippets, independent snippets, that allows us to test them independently, right? You can automate tests, you can create unit tests, right? That render the content and make sure that it's rendering as it should, that it's behaving as it should, independent of the rest of the application. That's one of the great features of React.js, right? You can create all these unit tests, right? So this navigates to home. Well, at least home works and great works. Okay, that's all I care. Oh yeah, at least we'll need assignments at least. Let's add assignments in there too. So assignments. Does that work? Okay, assignments works, home works, and grades works. Perfect. Okay, so we got the beginning of those, at least those two sidebars. Let's focus now on what the actual content of the home screen might be, right? The content contains modules, right? These are kind of like a list of modules. And then on the right-hand side, you have, kind of like a whole bunch of other status stuff, right? Status links. So how would you build that? So in the home screen would have to bring together all this content, right? It needs to bring the left canvas navigation sidebar, bring in the course navigation sidebar, right? It needs to bring in the modules in the middle, right? And then the sidebar on the right. So it would be something like a table that has multiple columns, right? That then would have in each column, it would have the various pieces of content. We're still missing the main content here, which is the list of modules in the center. Let's work on that. Let's create that module. Let's create that module. So that would be under the home directory. So maybe we'll create probably should be its own thing here. Probably notice that the navigation here is that if you're in the home, right? In the home, you have these modules in the middle, and you have these like side links over here. But if you go to the modules section, notice that it has the same main content as the home, minus the sidebars on the right. See that? Right. So it looks like this component is kind of like reusing this middle thing here, right? This list of modules, right? So perhaps, right, we could create the modules under the modules directory and then use that content to paste it inside of the home. Yes. All right, so let's do that. Let's create as a sibling of the home. We can create the modules. And in here, let's create what? Let's see. What do we have in there? What do we have in here? So it's just looks like it's a list of things. Maybe it could be, and we saw that the way they implemented it, the way the actual Canvas application implemented it did implement it as an unordered list. See that? Right. So let's follow their lead. Let's create this as a list. And it looks like this also is a list, right? All these are lists. Right, it looks like the structure that they follow is, is this a list? Is it? I don't know. Span div, that's the div. Okay, so it's inside of a line item. Okay, so it looks like they're all lists, right? So it's a list and another list and then another list. This can be implemented several ways. I think the assignment asks you to do it using lists within lists. We could do that, right? Or they could be independent lists. Let's follow the lead of the assignment, right? So let's create a list that contains multiple lists, right? So this is the list for module 1. Right, so this is week 0, right? And so we could have several weeks, and then week 2. Okay, and we can render it, see what it looks like. So this is courses module. Okay, we have week 0, 1, 2, 1, and 2, and then inside of each week we can have another sub list. right? Where you can have the content, right? Where the week 1 might be resources, or I'm sorry, no, week 0 here, you have learning resources, so learning objectives, right? And then this could be another sub list, right? Where it's intro, and we can just list a few things here. Intro, assignments, topics, whatever, right? So you create a list of things, right? A list within list within list. Obviously, eventually all this is going to be dynamic. We're going to be hitting a server and say, hey, send me all the learning objectives, yada, yada, yada. It's going to come back as an array of objects. We're going to iterate over that and going to be rendering all these lists programmatically. For now, it's all copy paste, yes? All manual. So once we have these few pieces, we can then come back to the home screen and start actually creating what the home screen should look like. The home screen is a combination of the canvas navigation on the left-hand side, then the course navigation in the second column, and then the modules in the third column. Yes? Right, so let's do that. So the home screen is what? It needs to be a layout of these 4 columns, right? And right now, the only way that we know how to create columns is using a table. We haven't talked about tables. So this is how not to lay out a page, right? So early on, when HTML just came out, there was no intent on this being a main publishing technology rivaling newspapers or magazines or anything like that, right? It was meant for just publishing research papers, sharing amongst colleagues, and so there was no initial support for rendering things horizontally, right, in columns, right? Yes, there were tables for rendering rows of columns, but the intent of tables was to represent tabular data, right, where you had records, right, and you had fields for each one of the records. Yes, where each column was a temperature, right, a speed, a whatever, right? It was from some experiments that they were running. Correct? Right? They were not meant for laying out things horizontally. But unfortunately, HTML early on did not have any way of being able to render things horizontally, right? So how would you render this? Where you think you have things that are rendered next to each other, right? There's no support for that. So eventually what we're going to do is we're going to use CSS, right? We use Flex to be able to do this, but we don't have that just yet, okay? So for now, we're going to misuse tables, right, for what they were not intended for. We're going to create a table that has one row that has 1, 2, 3, and 4 columns, right? And in each, we're going to copy and paste the different content and put it where it goes. Everybody good? Okay. When we get to CSS, we're going to revisit this, right? And we're going to use Flex, grid systems. We're going to make it responsive. We're going to do all sorts of things. But for now, we don't have CSS just quite yet. Okay. So let's remove the home here and let's create a table. So a table, as I mentioned, right? It allows you to render tabular data. And it has 3 portions. It has 3 sections. It has a T head for headings, but our table doesn't have any headings. It has a T body. This is where you would put the actual data that you want to render in a tabular format, right? And then you have T foot, right? Now, where you would put, in your tabular data, you would put at the bottom, some summations, averages, right? Maximums, minimums, some aggregate value of your data. Yes, but again, we're not doing any of that. Tables are to implement things such as this, where you have students and you have their assignments, right? And you have tabular data, right? Where each column has the same data type, has the same. This is what tables were meant to for use, right? And at the bottom, you had maybe some averages, max, min, and things like that, right? But let's misuse it. Go back home. So here's table. So we're going to ignore the head and the body and the foot for now. So in the body, we're going to create a row, and we're going to have a single row, not multiple rows, because we're only using it for laying out content. The first column, we're going to put the Canvas navigation, right? In the second column, we're going to put the course navigation, and in the third column, we're going to put the actual content of the modules, right? And in the last one, we're going to put course status, I think it is, right? And so if we now navigate back home, right, there we go. We have something that presumably is a table. It doesn't look very tabular, does it? It looks like just one long line. But believe me that it's a table. Actually, you can style it with some old styling, where you can turn on some border, the size of the border, so you can actually see that these are columns, right, and rows. Make sense? Some really simple styling, more styling. Again, we will abandon this primitive styling when we get to CSS, right? Where we can do some really powerful styling. But for now, this is good enough, right? We can also make the width so that it expands the entire width of the screen, right? So it expands out. And then a few other things we might do is we're ready to start putting actual content in here, right? We can go back to the modules. If we go back to the modules, we can just select and copy and just paste it in here, right? If we refresh, notice that we do have the modules content there. We can go back to the course navigation and copy the content and paste it in the course navigation. Paste that in there. Refresh, and finally the Canvas navigation. Copy and paste it in here, right? Now, this is very, very primitive, right? Us manually copying content and pasting, right? Eventually, right, in a couple of weeks, what we're going to do is that we're going to take this HTML, we're going to wrap it in a parentheses, we're going to put it inside of a return, right, inside of a function, right? Inside of a function, we'll call it Canvas navigation, which returns this hard-coded text, right? It doesn't even have to be hard-coded. We could put this in an array, right? We could put it inside of an array of objects and then iteratively, compute this, right? And once it's in a function, now you can just import, right? You can import the Canvas navigation and just render it wherever you want it, right? You can inject it anywhere you want it to, as opposed to copying and pasting like we're doing manually. Yes, right? But we don't know how to do that just yet, right? We'll get to that in a little bit. So for now, we're stuck with just copying and pasting. Pretty good? Okay. So yeah, let's go back. So this is what it looks like right now. A little rough on the edges. But it's looking more or less what we're being asked to do. One other additional style that we might add is that by default, the content of a row of a cell renders in the middle of the column. Okay, so we can override that, by adding the vertical alignment. We can say v-align. Again, this is somewhat primitive without CSS. We can align it to the top, right? It just brings it up to the top, right? So same thing here. This one. So all the TDs in the last one. Right, so everything goes to the top. Everything okay? Right? And I still should be able to navigate to other things. So I'm at home, I should be able to go to grades, modules. I'm in home, right? So I'm in the right place. And so obviously, if I made a mistake in the hyperlinks of the module all these links, right? I would have to fix it and then copy and paste it and fix wherever I'm using it. Yes. Oh, that was using v-align top. Yeah. Later on with CSS, we're going to use a different strategy. But for now, we don't have CSS. Yes. when we get to JavaScript. In JavaScript, we're going to be importing, right, these functions, and wherever you have the function, you can just render it. We will have abstraction when we get to JavaScript. Right now, we don't have abstraction. Yeah, excellent. So there we have, right? So we have the home screen, and so we can apply the same strategy, right, to keep going and doing all the other screens. Let's now consider the grade screen, right? Let's take a look at the grade screen. So the grade screen has two portions that we already have, right? We already have this list. We already have this link, right? Already implemented, right, in the Canvas navigation and in the course navigation, right? The only thing missing for being able to create this screen is these grades, right? So let's focus on that, and then we should be able to use the same strategy of just copying all these three things into a screen to lay it out the way it looks here. Okay, all right. So let's do that. So in the grade screen, so this is where we're going to put everything together, but we just need a place to hold the actual grades. So let's put it in a separate file. We'll call it grade stream. Call it just grades maybe. And in here we're going to create the table that contains all those students. Plus there's some form elements in there, so we're going to get a chance to play around with forms as well and buttons. So let's take a look at that, right? So what does that look like? So if we go to grades, we have a couple form elements at the top. We have a couple buttons, right? We have a drop down. So let's take a look at implementing those, right? So this is just a button. So let's create a button. So this is our first form related elements, right? We have form, we have buttons, we have drop downs, input fields, radio buttons, checkboxes, everything you would expect in a typical form user interface, right? So this is we'll create import. Right? We should be able to navigate there to see our intermediate work. So this is grades, and then grades.html. So we have so that's how it renders by default, right? Later on with CSS, we can make it look much prettier. So let's see what else. We have a drop down that has export. So several options for exporting. Right. So to do a drop down, we can use the select HTML element. And then you can have several options in here, right? So this is for, what is it? Export. Okay, so a few things here. So these, right, we refer to them as tags, right? We say that this is an opening tag, and notice that there is a matching closing tag that has a slash in it, right? The name of this tag is button, right? So we say that tags have a name. And in between the opening and closing tag, we say that this is the body, right? The body of the tag. Okay. Now the body of the tag can be a simple text like here, import, or it could be other tags, right? Tags that contain other tags. Yes. Right? And this eventually gets rendered in the DOM as a hierarchy, right? A hierarchy of elements or nodes, right? Now, when you're typing this in text, we refer to this as tags. When it gets parsed into memory, we refer to them as nodes or elements. Yes, right. This is one specific syntax that we use to create this hierarchical structure of using XML. Yes, right. We have lots of pointy brackets everywhere, right? But these could have been just curly brackets, right? Or square brackets, just the same, yes? Or like in Python, just use tabs, right, to declare things that are hierarchical, correct? So one thing is the syntax of creating the structure, right? And the structure itself, yes? Right? The syntax here, we're using XML to create the hierarchy, right? And in here, we use the vocabulary of tags and opening tags and closing tags and things like that. Once it gets parsed, right, it's just it's just basically an inverted tree, right? An n-ary tree that has a whole bunch of branches and leaves and whatnot. Yes. And once it gets parsed, it makes no sense to use the vocabulary of tags, right? We just call them nodes in a tree. Make sense? Right? Now the browser is nice enough to represent the DOM, this hierarchical structure, keeping the name of the tag in the same syntax of pointy brackets. Okay, it didn't have to do that, right? Right. This is just a hierarchical representation of our syntax, right? But it keeps it just to, for us human beings to make the relationship of what I typed in my document, in my text document, and its representation in memory. Okay, right? Ideally, they're the same, but not necessarily, right? Okay, yeah. So I created this drop down. This is a whole bunch of export options, right? I'm just gonna, just to test that it's in there. Yeah. Okay. What else? What else do we have here? We have export. We have this little gear that I'm not gonna implement, and then we have these input fields. Let's create the input fields. So we have student names, so student names, right? And we have an input field, which is actually a combination of two things. It's something where you can type, and it's also a drop down. See that? It's a drop down as well, right? There's no native support for that. Well, actually, no. You could do a data, but I'm not going to cover that. Where as you type, it changes the list below it, right? Which is pretty cool. I'm only going to implement the input field right now, right? We can add the combo, search a little later. Right now, just I want to just use a simple input field. So an input field is implemented using the input tag, right? And notice that this input field has a slash at the end. See that? We call that a self-closing tag, right? Meaning it doesn't have an opening tag and a closing tag. It's just one, that it's the same time an opening and a closing tag. And there the slash is at the end. See that? As opposed to having the opening and closing, right? This one just has the slash at the end. Make sense? Right? And in these types of tags, there is no body, right? It doesn't have content between the opening and closing, because there is no opening and closing. There's just one, right? It opens and it closes itself. Okay. And then we have what do we have? What else we have? We have assignment names, and then another input field like that, right? Okay, let's see how that renders. Not quite as we wanted it. Not quite as we wanted it. All these elements are kind of ignoring my layout, right? I laid it out nice and neat with new lines, right? And it's completely ignoring my layout. And the reason is that some elements, these particular tags that I'm using, are behaving as inline elements, right? Inline. Inline means that things render from top to bottom, from left to right, right? And things just flow from left to right until it doesn't fit anymore, right? And there's just wraps, okay? So that's one strategy that the browser uses to just render stuff on the screen. That's one particular strategy. There's another strategy that is called block rendering, that adds vertical spacing, right? So for instance, I can configure this to be a heading of size 3, right? And if I render now student names, right, it's not behaving inline anymore. It's behaving like a block element, right? And block elements take up the entire width of the screen, right? And push anything below it, right? It adds vertical spacing, right? It pushes everything below it, right? Notice that everything, the input field, the text, is still behaving inline, right? So if I want to deliberately change the behavior, right, I have to add specific tags of specific layout that I want. So for instance, let's add H3 again on this one. And now everything is laid out as I expected. Everybody good? Although the implementation that the assignment gives you, I think, I don't know, does it? Okay, it doesn't ask you to lay them out, side by side, right? But we could have, right? We could have display them like the target rendering, right? We could have added a little table here, right? A little row, right, with a couple of columns, right? And then in each column, we could have just put one in there. We could have done that. So that now puts them side by side. Yes. Sure. It doesn't have to be an exact. If it looks better than what I'm giving you, even better. Yeah. So that's kind of like the minimum bar, right? But if you go beyond, absolutely. And we could maybe make this a little bigger and do the width 100%, right? So it's expanded. Okay. Yeah. So let's see. Let's continue. And now that we have that, we can take a look at the actual data. And so we have, what do we have here? We have a button to apply filters. We could add that. And then we have just a table that contains student names on the left, right? And then you have all the assignments, right? Again, it'd be nice if we could have JavaScript and we could just have an array of students, right? An array of grades, and it just would iterate and create the rows in the table and the. So we don't have that just yet. So let's just do this manually for now. So let's do table with 100, and not quite. So here we do have headings, right? Stop it. We have headings at the top, right? And we have actual data. So let's do a T body, and we'll do a table row. And here we're going to have several headings. So notice that in here we use TDs. TDs mean data, table data, whereas THs mean heading. Right, so this is going to style it a little bit. It's going to make it a little bolder, a little darker, right? And it's going to center it. So it's going to have what? It's going to have a student name, so student name. And then it's going to have a couple assignments, so A1, HTML, then H2 CSS, JavaScript, PHP. No, we're not doing PHP. SQL, React. All right. And we could add a whole, quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3, quiz 4, quiz 5, and we have maybe. I'm deliberately making it long because I wanted to make a point. Lots of exams. Right, and then in the oh wait, oh I'm sorry, I meant this to be the T head. Yeah, sorry, T head. Because these are the headings at the top, right? And then the body is going to contain the actual data for each one. And let's see if my AI. So this will be Alice. Will you create some data for me? Really, one at a time? I can just copy them. There we go. I don't know if I have made too many. Or not enough. And so I'm just going to make the border 1 so that we can see that this is where we. Okay, I missed 1. All right. Let's add just 1 more. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So the point I was trying to make is that when it's too much content, right, it forces the content to scroll left and right. Usually, it is a bad practice, right? That we are not deliberately controlling the scroll bars. Typically, we want to make sure that we control when the scroll bars appear and when they don't appear, right? And usually, right scroll bars are no-no. We try to avoid them as much as possible, but sometimes we do need them. For instance, when we legitimately have so much to show, right, left and right. Yes. Which one? Oh, yes, that's a GitHub code Copilot. Yeah, yeah, it's an AI. It's I would expect you all to be using some kind of AI tool, right, to help you productivity. Yes, I believe so. Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. You could do without writing a function. You can describe the function. It'll write the function for you. And say, write me a function that sorts whatever, blah blah, and it puts it in this format. And it'll put it for you. Yeah. You still have to babysit it. Sit it for now. If you give it bad data, it'll come up. If you give it garbage, it'll produce garbage. Right. So so it still needs a lot of babies for now, but eventually we'll see. Well, at some point, right? It's the same thing when we created IDEs, when we created all these tools that increment our productivity. We're always creating new languages, we've been trying to automate our way out of our job for quite a while, and our productivity has increased exponentially in the last several decades, and now it's going to shoot out even further, right? So at some point we'll be our own team, right? We'll have at our disposal a team of engineers as we code, and so it'll create all sorts of new ways of creating engineering software. Okay, it's creating Bob, but it's getting lazy. I wanted to create the whole row. Okay, so we have Bob here. So yeah, so the point I was trying to make is that oftentimes, right, if it's too big, if it doesn't fit, we add these scroll bars. At some point, when we come back to this next week, when we talk about CSS, we want to be able to control where scroll bars appear and they don't, right? For instance, here is a good implementation where we scroll only the table, not necessarily entire screen, right? Notice that the navigation still stays, right? And it doesn't go away, right? Also, as I scroll up and down, notice that the top header, right, stays put, right? So these are considerations that we want to take into account, right, when we come back later with CSS and make things that are responsive. When things are too big to fit, for instance, if we go back to the home screen, one thing that we can't do just yet is that as the screen becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and we can't fit all four columns, right? We want our application to be smart enough to say, oh, well, maybe I'll hide the last column, right? And I can add that space and just sacrifice that last one and give it to someone who's more important than me, right? Which is the modules. And if it gets even further down, even narrower, again, I can maybe sacrifice the first two columns, right, so that I can keep the most important content here, and maybe make it available in a separate drop down or some other sub menu that I can show and hide, right? So now I can have the same application, be able to target phones, tablets, any size screen, right? And that's what we call responsive design, right? Right, applications that are smart enough to adapt to be responsive to various types of audiences. Make sense? But that's more on that when we get to CSS next week. Where were we? Great. Yeah. So once we have these grades on the right-hand side, we can now just grab this, right, and build out and lay it out into a whole screen, right? So we can come back to the index, right, and recreate the table layout that we had earlier, right? That could be a template, perhaps, where this could be a table again, right? Same thing with width 100%, right? Maybe the border 1. table. We have the one row. We have a couple of TDs, all of them with V align top, and that we can have our three pieces of columns, right? We can copy and paste the content, and we can bring in the canvas navigation in here. We can bring in the course navigation in here, right? And we can bring in the grades and put them in here. Right. Again, up until we get to JavaScript, there's going to be a lot of copy and pasting. Right. Save that, and then we should be able to navigate to grades, and there we are. Right. In the grades, we should now be able to go to home, right, and go down to grades. Right. Navigate between the two. Right? Now you can set the size of the columns. You can force them to be something small so that you don't get this change, this abrupt change. So for instance, you can make this 10%, 10%, and the rest just expands to take up the remaining. But for that, we need CSS, and we don't have CSS to be able to do that just yet. So it's fine if it resizes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there you have it. We tackled a couple of these two screens. Right. Let's. I'm going to skip over the assignment screen. I'm going to head over to the next one, where is the assignment editor. Right, the assignment editor allows you to edit a particular assignment. We already know how to do this, right? We have some forms at the top. We have lists, headings, hyperlinks to navigate. So I'm going to leave that to you. So instead, let's focus on this editor. And the reason I want to focus on it is that because it has tons of these form elements, and I want to talk about form elements. Right, we want to cover text areas, checkboxes, radio buttons, right? A whole bunch of other input elements. Okay, so yeah, let's take a look at that. So under assignments, we have assignments, which we should be able to navigate there. Assignments, but I'm not going to look at the assignments. I'm going to look at the assignment editor. Assignment editor. Okay, and in here, let's have index. Actually, no. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Assignment editor. So this is assignment editor. Okay. So in here, I would like to implement. So if I go to assignment and I click on an assignment, the original implementation is that you first navigate to an assignment and then you click on edit, right? So I simplify that to just, when you click on an assignment, it just goes to the editor right away, right? So the editor has an input field, it has a text area. There's like a WYSIWYG plugin that allows you to, create rich text. I simplified that for our assignment. So in ours, it's just a simple text area, right? It's just implemented as a simple text area. But the original implementation was this fancy plugin that allows you to create headings and paragraphs and lists and tables. But we could do that when we get to the React part, right? You can take that text area and replace it with a plugin that gives you all these rich text editor, which is pretty cool. But we have checkboxes, we have drop downs, input fields. I removed a few things here, and we have some date pickers. All right, so let's discuss these form elements. Yeah, so the text editor is going to have the same thing, right? It's going to have a table that has two columns on the left-hand side. It has the actual editor, right? So that's what this is going to be, right? It's going to be a table, blah, 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 all that we already have done, right? So we'll come back to that in a minute, but I want to focus first on the editor itself, right? So this is the editor, the for, right? Because I'm going to talk about all the form elements in there. Okay, so in the editor, we're going to have an assignment name, right? We're going to have an input field, right? And let's render that. The editor. Editor. There it is. Not quite what I want. I want it to look something like this. Okay? And so this input field lives in a separate line. The couple ways, right? We can make this a heading. We can make that a heading, and that would add a block, yes, and it would put the input field below it, yes, right? Another way is that we can use the tag called BR for break. So that creates a break, right? A page break, right? And then it forces the content to go into the next line, yes, right? And there's yet another way of doing it, which is a little more kosher, is to wrap this inside of a div, right? A div is a generic division, right, that allows you to create logical rectangular areas, right, that are logically separated from other sections. And a side effect is that it behaves like a block element, right? It takes up the entire width of the screen and it adds vertical spacing, right? So if I refresh, notice that indeed it's adding the vertical spacing. Yes. Breaks are frowned upon, right? So you can still use them, right? But just not too much. Divs are preferred. All right. So our input field, if we see the implementation has an initial value, right? Has an initial value, which is the name of the assignment, right? Presumably this value has been pre-populated, from having gone out to the server, and said, okay, well, give me the object representation of this assignment, and it comes back, and then programmatically we fill in, how many points, when it's due, what category it's in, right, and whether it's percentage or points, and also the default, the name, right? So for now, we don't have the database, we don't have the server. So I'm gonna hard code the value, and we can do that using the value attribute, right? The value attribute sets the default value for the input field, right? It sets it so that you can start typing. You can see the value, and then you can edit it, right? Then you can edit the value in there. Yes. Okay. Another thing is that you can configure a hint, right, or a clue of what is it that we're asking you to type in here, right? So for instance, we can give it a placeholder. The placeholder is an example piece of text, right, that we're expecting the user to type. Okay, so we might say, maybe we'll give it as an example assignment 1, right? And notice if I refresh, it doesn't show. I don't see it. Right? Well, it only shows when this is empty. When it's empty, right, it shows as a very light gray background, kind of giving you an example of what is it that I want you to type. Make sense? Right? When I start typing, it goes away, right? And then it comes back when I delete it. Right? And there will be a quiz question that will literally ask you to do something like this. Right? So it's okay. Yes. In search bars, yes. In drop downs, no, you can't. You can put a tooltip. So to create a tooltip, you can configure that using title. Title, right, allows you to put maybe perhaps a little more verbose explanation of what is that you're expecting. This is the name of the assignment, right? And so you could be a little more verbose about it. And it only appears when you hover over the content, right? And you can add a title or tooltip on anything, right? Not only on input fields, you can add it to a piece of text, to a paragraph, to a heading, right? On anything, you can add title to anything. Yes. Now, these here, right? These are tags, yes, or DOM elements. These are attributes, right? And attributes have name and values, name value pairs. Right? And these attributes are used for configuring the behavior of a tag, right? For instance, the tooltip, its initial value, right? Some hint behind the scenes and things like that. right? It changes it. It overrides the behavior of the default rendering. Okay, right? And some attributes are very specific to certain tags, like placeholder. Placeholder is only valid for an input field, right? Whereas title is an attribute that you can use it anywhere. Okay, uh, and uh, uh, um, and so you can put a tooltip anywhere you want. Careful in the quiz, I might try to fool you and put here like tooltip. Okay, so that's wrong, right? So it's title and things like that. So I'll put a placeholder and say fill in the blank 1 so that if you hover over the elements, right, it'll show up a little tooltip. Okay, and then you have to fill in the blank saying title. Okay. All right, so we have that. Keep going. Another thing that is useful is that especially in small screens, oftentimes these input fields are too small, especially like checkboxes and radio buttons, like a pain, right? To click on it, and you have to like peck at the small screen. So anything you could do to increase the clickable area, right, the better, right, to improve the experience for the user. So for instance, one thing we could do is that since this text is somehow related to the input field, it'd be nice that not only if I click on the input field, it becomes focused. What if I can click on the label itself, right? It'd be nice that it would also become focused, right? And we can add that behavior by adding the label, using the label tag, wrapping your text with label, right? That on itself doesn't do anything. If I refresh, notice that it doesn't change anything. But now it allows me to relate the two, the label with the input field. The way I can relate these two is by adding a unique identifier, right? I can add a unique identifier to any element, right? So for instance, assignment name, and then I can reference it from the label. I can say that this label is for the assignment name. Now they're related. Okay. Now this label is related to this input field, right? So that if I click on this, notice that it becomes focus. Make sense? Right? It's not dramatic. It's much more useful for like checkboxes and radio buttons that are really, really tiny, especially on a phone, right? Where you can have a radio button and then may have a lot of explanatory text that anywhere you click, it selects the radio button or the checkbox. Yes? So we'll do a couple of those a little later. What else? So let's do this text area down below. So for the text area, so we'll call this description, and so this will be label, description, and this will be text area. So for text area, we're going to use the actual text area element, that if we refresh it again, all form elements behave as an inline, right? They all want to just go from left to right. Okay, flow from left to right. So again, I'm going to force this with a BR, even though it's not kosher, right? So I'm just going to wrap it around, and I can put some default value. Now you'd think that the value would be added by using the value attribute, right? And that's not the case, right? We add the default value by entering the text in between the opening and closing tags, right? So this is the description of the assignment, right? So it adds that piece of content. Make sense? Now, careful that it literally takes whatever is between those two tags. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. No, if I hover, right, it displays the title, the tooltip. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, tooltip is generated by the title. Yep. There it is, right? And it appears anywhere you hover or near where you hover. Yeah, so notice that it takes literally whatever's in between the two opening and closing tags. Notice if I refresh, there's some additional text in here. See that? These extra spaces. It's because there are some extra spaces in there. See that? So it literally takes whatever's in between the opening and closing tag. So be careful, right? If it's not exactly what you want, right? That you might want to not put the extra spaces, right, and put it right there. Now your IDE might force the extra line, right, and it might not be what you want. Okay. You can also configure the size, the default size. So for instance, you can change it to have more columns. You say columns equal 20 columns. I guess the default is 20, 40. There it is. So expand it to be 40 columns, or have 10 rows to make it expanded. It also by default has this little handle that allows you to kind of resize it to your specific size, right? Right. Also notice that the default font is Courier. Right. So that's it's a monospaced. What else? So we have that. All right, let's look at points. Right. Again, we could lay out this in a table with two columns, where you have the label on the TD, and then you have the actual input field on the right-hand side. Right, if you want to lay it out the way it's here, I'm not asking you to do that, but you certainly could. Right? Later on, when we look at the CSS next week, we'll use a grid system, right, as opposed to a table, right? And we'll use flex and whatnot, right, to lay these things from left to right, right, which you can't unless you either use a table or use CSS. Right? So let's look at points. With his points. And for points, we have an input field. And so we have points. Again, we need to add some break here. Let's add maybe div. There we go, points. So points, like this suggests, it's a number, right? It's expecting us to type a number. Okay? But our points is allowing us to type anything. Okay? So a good practice is to constrain your input fields to whatever actual data type you're expecting, right? To minimize any error that the user might enter into filling out your form. Otherwise, you have to do validation. You have to do all sorts of cleaning up the data, right? So one way that you can constrain the data type is that you can give it a type. You can give it type. And there's a whole bunch of types. You could be a checkbox. You could be a color picker. You could be a date picker, right? Date, time, or email. And these are all constraints of what you can actually type in that input field. By default, the default is just plain old text. That's the default. That's why here in the input assignment name, it allows us to type whatever we want. Okay. So if it's text, you can type anything you want, but you can constrain it and say that this is a number. Right? And by constraining it, now, right, we can't type any ASCII characters, only numbers. Right. It also adds these additional controls that allows you to go up and down by one. Right. And you still have value. You can say value, 98. There's our 98. Okay, and you can go up one and down one. Now, typically, points, you shouldn't be allowed to have more than 100 points. You can also constrain that. You can say that the maximum, right, is 100. Right, so that now if you try to put anywhere above 100, it'll just stop at 100. Or you can, and also you can say a minimum of 50, right? So it knows that it can make it small enough to fit just only the characters that it knows that it needs, right? Also, you can change the step, right? Like you can change how much up and down it goes. So by fives, for instance, so you can go 195, 90, so it jumps up and down by that step. Make sense? Right? So same thing for email. right, or telephone. There's a whole bunch of data types of input fields, and you should always constrain it to whatever you're expecting the user to type. This is especially useful in phones, right, because the browser on a phone, right, will respect the data type and will only pop up the keyboard, the correct keyboard for whatever you're typing. Like, for instance, if you're expecting an email, it'll pop up the email keyboard, right? With the @ sign and the drop down for the domain, right? Which makes it a much better experience instead of you having to type each character. Same thing if you're expecting a number, well, it'll pop up the number keyboard, right? So that you don't have the alphanumeric keyboard, you have only the number. Same thing for telephones, right? You'll get the pound sign, you'll get the the period, the dash, the comma, semicolon, right, to type in telephone numbers. Plus, so definitely, make an effort to make use the correct data types for these, right? For radio buttons and checkboxes, let's take a look at that. For instance, we have a submission type. So let's have submission type, and we have several checkboxes. We have a text entry. So for checkboxes, we can use the same input, but we can say type checkbox, right? And we can display the various types of submission. We have a website. Make sure I don't save this. Like that, and finally, file upload. So if I re-render this, again, everything renders in inline. And so we can just very quickly, perhaps, add a VR. And break this like that. So break that up. So the way they work is these are for implementing things where you have check all that apply, right, one or more, right, which is fine. They're not mutually exclusive, right? They're related to they don't exclude one or the other. Now by default they are unchecked, but you can give it an initial checked state, right, where it checks that by default. Also notice that we could use, especially in smaller screen, we could definitely use a label here, right? So that you can make the text clickable and selectable, right? So that if we add a label around this, right, you can add a label, and you can add a unique identifier. This would be URL, and you can reference this in your for URL. And if I click on website URL, notice that it checks the checkbox. So again, this improves the experience for the user, so they don't have to, especially on smaller screen. An equivalent way of doing the same thing is that instead of using this label separately like this, you can wrap the whole thing with labels. You can say label, right, and wrap it and put it like that, right? So you can wrap the input field and the text so that if either one is clicked, right, it selects the checkbox. Now, so this one works when the text and the checkbox are literally next to each other. But what if you want the checkbox over there and the text way down here somewhere, right? That's where the ID and the label and the for is useful. Right? So let's take a look at distinguishing this with radio buttons, right? I don't have a good radio button example, so I'll just make one up. It says favorite colors, and you can only have one favorite color, I guess favorite color. And so we can have a couple of input fields where the type is the radio button, and radio buttons are meant to be mutually exclusive, right? Meaning that if you select one, it unselects the others, right? You can't have more than one. So checkboxes is for more, one or more. whereas radio buttons is for, at most one. Yes. So here we have red, blue, and green. Now, by default, they are not mutually exclusive, right? You can select as many as you want because they don't know anything about each other. They don't know that if I'm selected, you have to be unselected. By default, they're not grouped. And the way we group them is by giving them the same name. So for instance, we can give them a color. And so name, color to all of them. Now that they know that they all have the same name, now they're mutually exclusive, right? So if you select one, you don't select the other. Make sense? So careful to distinguish between IDs and names, right? IDs give it a unique identifier of the element in the page, and it's unique, right? You can't use this ID anywhere else, right? Only to refer to it, but not to declare it, yes? Whereas names, they could repeat. You can have multiple fields, multiple elements that have the same name, right? And that's how you actually how you group them together. Make sense? Right? There'll be a trick question in the quiz. We'll try to fool you into whether it's an ID or a name or blah, blah, blah. Okay, so careful there. All right? Yes. Not right. Right. You mean to create the relationship? Certainly, but that's not natively supported on whether something is, if something selected, then I allow that. You would need JavaScript to enforce that kind of, and certainly you could use the IDs to enforce that relationship, but not natively in HTML. So what about if I had another set of radio buttons, right? And somehow I'm using the same name inadvertently, right? And so this is favorite genre, say, right? And this is rock, blues. I can't spell. Disco. So because they have the same name, because they still have the same name, even though they're logically in two different categories, they're still mutually exclusive. See that? Right. So I would make sure that these names are separate, right? Are different. So I could say I could use a genre. Right. So now there are two separate independent groups, which within the group, each one is mutually exclusive, right? So this is mutually exclusive amongst the genre, and this is mutually exclusive among the colors. Make sense? Right? And finally, real quick, the due dates. If I have, for instance, a due date, and I have an input field of type date, right? This allows me to create a date picker where I can select the dates, and I can give it an initial value using value. Now the form of this value of the date is a standard. It always has to be year, month, and day, right? So this would be 2023, 09, 12, or 15. So, and then when you click on it, it shows you the date that it was selected plus today, right? You can also set constraints. We can say that the minimum is earlier this month, 09, 05, right? So that notice that it blocks out anything before the 5th, right? So you can't choose anything before the 5th, right? Or you can give it a max, right, where you can't choose anything beyond the 23rd. Right, where it blocks out, right? It doesn't even allow you to navigate away, right, into other months, other years, because you're blocked out and you can't choose any date. Now, when you click on it, it sets the value, But you can also control it with your keyboard, up and down, right, which is a nice touch. Again, you would not put a simple text field for them to type a date. It would make it very error prone, right? Instead, you would give out provide all the widgets for them to be able to enter and minimize any errors that the user could make when they enter data, right? The mantra is that you validate early, you validate at the beginning and the end, right? And before you get it to the server, right? So you validate as much as possible and avoid any errors, okay? All right, that's all I have. Thank you.